The other thing is, and I think now, the military is actually embracing this way of looking at dealing with post-traumatic stress. And I find it really helpful in working with children and adolescents. Looking at the idea early on, not later on in the work that we do, of how do we build resilience, and how do we build empathy, and how do we introduce compassion. And those, again, those are, some of that came from the Eastern philosophies, really. And now that they know more about how the brain functions, we actually know where those areas are in the brain, that have to do with empathy and that have to do with compassion. And, I think that a lot of people earlier on working with trauma kind of wrote off the fact that people, and especially children, could learn some of this because they were so kind of all over the place and chaotic and emotionally challenged, and that empathy and compassion and these kinds of things were out of their range because they had so many challenges. But actually those are the things that if you can get those into them at the ground level, it makes it a lot easier to integrate the trauma experience later on, because then you're building strengths first. So that's kind of the way that I'm starting to see this trauma-informed approach, is how do we take what we do experientially and build those kinds of things. So that's my political view. Just please be conscious. And what I mean by that too is I think, conscious of what we do and what results we're getting, because I still do things, sometimes I think, well, I think this is going to work, and it kind of blows up in my face. Kid just doesn't relate to it, or, and I have to step back and regroup. But I just think also being conscious is, staying abreast of kind of what's going out there in the literature about trauma. And it's not that hard to do. It's pretty prevalent now. These sensory ways of working are getting more and more out there into the literature. So, because I think one of the things we want to get people to do is be able to tell their story, because that's part of their reparation. So some of that immediately starts to come out through the image, or if they make music or drum or whatever it is, those sensory means the story is coming out. It's just coming out in a sensory form. I like the other piece though too about, I think, it's that, I can remember that quote from the Jewish religion about if you save one life, you save everyone's life. Because there's this domino effect, and I think that that's true when we're working with trauma. That sometimes we think, well, we've got this one, we did some good work with that person, but it really has a domino effect on society. And even if you're just looking at society as a neighborhood, or because I do some work in Louisville on occasion, either as an art therapist or artist in residence type thing, with some of our more at-risk areas, which are, I don't know what it is, and every city has one side of town. Ours is the west side of town. There's just a lot of challenges there. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of kids that are at risk to become involved in drug abuse or crime, or this, that, and the other. But if you get into one neighborhood and you make a few changes with a few of those teenagers, it starts to domino effect in that neighborhood.